Morning, everyone. Happy hump day. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie. Have my mug.
Yeah, there we go. Got no tea in it. He's just waving it around.
Just waving it around, no.
Because he already had the gin.
It's too valuable to put drink in it.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments. Ask us your questions. The best ones. Get something better than a blankety-blank checkbook and pen. Better than the Strictly Glitterball, more glamorous News Agenda mug. So can't answer them all. We will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the race to vaccinate 100,000 NHS staff before an April deadline, by which point they might face the sack. More on that later. But first, let's turn to pages 8 and 9 and the biggest story that everyone's talking about, the Tory sleaze car crash pile-up. The car crash that is Boris Johnson's amoral leadership has now taken in some very big beasts, earning 5, 6, 7-figure sums for outside work, including Theresa May and her former Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox. Now, he has been found to have earned £1 million from outside work as a barrister, including the British Virgin Islands, for the British Virgin Islands, I should say, where he's been advising them against the UK government in a corruption scandal. On top of that, he flew out there for a month while the Commons was sitting and while everyone else was banned from flying to sit on the beach where he voted remotely in Parliament without anyone realising he wasn't isolating at home like everyone else. And this morning, Jason, videos appeared of him using his parliamentary office via Zoom to appear in a British Virgin Islands hearing in his capacity as their legal brief and apparently disappearing for 20 minutes after the division bell rang, perhaps to vote, and then coming back and apologising. Now, I think that's the full list of stuff that he's done. We could have heard more by the end of this broadcast, but the Tories have been blethering all week about how this stuff is within the rules and, you know, it's beneficial to Parliament and all the rest of it. But it's not within the rules by using the office that we pay for to do their own work, is it? He has definitely broken the rules there.
If it is his office, and the video seems to show that it is, and you can, as you can see, you can hear the division bell going, then that completely contravenes Article 16 of the MP's Code of Conduct, which says you should not use your office for outside interests. So, yeah, he looks like he is possibly banged to rights. I mean, you know, obviously he'll want a fair hearing, and I'm sure he'll be, as they say, lawyered up. And if he's representing himself, he'd be very expensive.
Yeah, 800 quid an hour. As James says, if MPs struggle on 81 grand, nearly 82, Jason, it's £81,932, and need their second jobs, what hope for ordinary folk? Plus, how do they manage 2 full-time jobs? Part of the criticism against Geoffrey Cox and some of the others is the amount of time they're spending on this stuff and how much they're actually in their constituencies, isn't it? Because although they do declare what they earn and who they earn it from and how many hours they might do, we've no way of verifying that's the hours they do. And they don't tell us where they go to do it either. They don't say, I did 16 hours in their office, or I did 16 hours at home, or 16 hours in Tortola. There's an awful lot of stuff they don't tell us about this, Jason, isn't there?
Yeah, and it gets very difficult, this, because if you actually talk to Labour MPs, particularly those who represent kind of constituencies with high levels of deprivation, with housing problems, with lots of people on welfare, but I tell you that not only is work a full-time job, they have to do extraordinarily long hours because the amount of casework they have is sometimes overwhelming. They can't answer all the letters. They can't help all the people they want to help. And the majority of MPs work actually extremely hard because it is such an all-encompassing job. You know, I know they say that, Parliament sits 4 days a week, sometimes 5. That's just for half of it. You know, you've got all the constituency meetings, you've got your surgeries, you've got the events to go to at the weekends. And that's before you start kind of, reading reports or kind of mugging up on the latest policies. So, it is a kind of, I have some sympathy for the majority of MPs. Then you've got these Tories who seem to have very few constituency obligations and have an awful lot of time to make an awful lot of money. And that's
this isn't a surprise. I mean, Mark Spencer, the Chief Whip, was having a conversation with Geoffrey Cox about this yesterday and read in the Riot Act, apparently, over the phone, because he's abroad. Of course he is.
Of course he's abroad.
But it's not like the Chief Whip hasn't known that Geoffrey Cox hasn't attended votes, that he hasn't spoken in Parliament, that he's been voting remotely, that he's a barrister, and that he's declaring outside interests of 7 figures in his register of interests. They have known this. The Tory party has known this for years.
But the Tory party is in no position to lecture when Boris Johnson's Prime Minister, because Boris Johnson, before he became Prime Minister and when he was a backbencher, was earning almost more than anybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, he described the £250,000 a year he got for writing his Telegraph column as, quote, chicken feed. And that, that was the money he was getting in addition to his public speaking and in addition to his other writings. And his advisory roles. I mean, the Prime Minister was the person who was kind of, you could argue, was cashing in from the status of being an MP more than anybody else.
Yeah. Someone sent me a copy of his register of interest this morning, actually, before I came on air. 20 grand for a speaking engagement and lots of speaking engagements. 20 grand a month from writing for the Telegraph. I wish someone could tell the Mirror editor it's apparently the going rate's 20 grand a month, because I could really do with it. It's definitely not what I get paid. And only 700 quid in book royalties because his books are rubbish. So he was enriching himself right up to the point that he walked in the door. Now, Mike says, morning, Mike. Owen Paterson used his office for meetings with Randox, one of these companies he was lobbying for. Geoffrey Cox had meetings in the British Virgin Islands to defend action against our government. And Ian Duncan Smith, we found out this morning, has headed a committee which changed the rules to help a company that was paying him. This is someone who was a company that was providing alcohol hand gel, which his committee recommended the NHS should buy more of. Do any Tory MPs actually work for anything other than their personal enrichment? He's got a point, Jason, because I think, as someone else said yesterday, if you're earning £1 million from your outside job, then it's the MP that's being the second job, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think Mike has kind of hit the nail on the head here, because the real issue here is the potential for a conflict of interest. And I'm using that phrase because the lawyers will be watching this, and if I say anything else, I could find myself in trouble. But it's when you get a situation, as we found out this morning, I looked at 3 different stories this morning. There was a story in the Mirror about a Tory MP called Steve Brine, who had a meeting with a vaccines minister with a company which he was being paid to consult for. And suddenly, a few months later, that company gets a contract. Maybe totally legal. It may be all above board, but it looks a bit suspicious. Then you've got the Shrewsbury Tory MP, Daniel Krasinski, who's the government's trade envoy to Mongolia, which has rich mining deposits. He's been paid up to £250,000 to advise.
Yeah, they seem to see this as just like a healthy
mining
kind
company.
of cross-pollination.
And as you said, you've got this Ian Duncan Smith story. Now, in all these three cases, they may all say, and it probably could well be totally above board. The problem is that where we don't know, because there's not enough transparency, that, you know, what private chats may or may not take place between an MP on behalf of a company they're paid to consult for. And that's why, you know, the only real way around this is a complete ban on any form of lobbying or consultancy by MP.
Yeah. Now, Michael says, morning, Michael, can a serving MP work a second job advising against his own government? Is that double standards? I think I'm right in saying, Michael, that if Geoffrey Cox was a civilian barrister, shall we say, an ordinary everyday barrister or lawyer, and they operate in a taxi rank system. So let's take the next case that comes in, okay, to their chambers. They don't really have much choice in what they can do. But if, say, he was working advising the British Virgin Islands on their corruption scandal, as he is, which just adds a whole new level of jam to this particular donut, then if someone else came through the door, which was going to be, you know, the other side of that argument, he would have to recuse himself from that and say, well, I can't act for both of you. I can't advise both of you. It would be a conflict of professional interests and unethical in terms of being a barrister. It would seem that someone who has been the Attorney General of the British government and therefore knows exactly how the British government fights its legal cases, is able to somehow or another advise someone being pursued legally by the British legal government, by the British government. And yes, I think you're right. It is definitely double standards. Whether it's technically a conflict of interest under the rules, who knows? But it definitely smells bad, doesn't it, Jason? It's just, there's nothing that Geoffrey Cox can come out of this looking good, but it does seem, I've been seeing stuff somewhere that he's not really perhaps going to be intending to stand as an MP next time anyway, and he's sort of just building up his other career so he can leave quietly when he wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, but you do, no offence to the people of Torridge and West Devon, which is his constituency, but you do wonder why they keep electing him when he's only kind of working half the time for them.
Because he's wearing a blue rosette, that's why.
Yeah.
There are parts of the country, I mean, my MP is much the same. Helen Grant does very, very little, has been involved in an expenses scandal here not long ago, and always votes for the government, even if it's against the local constituency interests, just gets re-elected every time.
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, it's how it is. But I think what they're facing now is if there's some suggestion this morning that Geoffrey Cox may have to actually stand down. This is getting too bad and too stinky. If he does so, you're looking at a by-election in Torridge and West Devon, which is prime Lib Dem territory, isn't it?
It was held by the Lib Dems. It was a Lib Dem seat. Emma Nicholson was the MP for a bit there. So yes, I mean, and at this time in the electoral cycle, midterm, given how well the Lib Dems did in Cheshire and Amersham, that could be troublesome. And, you know, they've already got the by-election in Owen Patterson's seat. They've got, sadly, they've got one in James Bokenshire's seat. Those are probably safer for the Tories. But I think, you know, the Devon one could be very problematic for them. Yes,
we'd have to see, won't we? Now, Mike says, Dominic Raab said yesterday, the voters will decide if his actions are appropriate. How can that work? An MP in a safe seat can get away with anything. Yes and no. Tatton was a safe seat when Neil Hamilton was in it, and he went, but they did have a progressive alliance there where Martin Bell was given a clear run at him in his white suit, which doesn't appear to be happening with any of our opposition parties at the moment. And speaking of opposition parties, before we get on to that, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Geoffrey Cox and the Tory sleaze pile-up? What do you think should be done about it? Do you mind that MPs have second jobs? Do you think it's beneficial to our parliament to have people in there who are doing other things as well? But we've got MPs from all sides being dragged in. There are some like Rosina Ali Khan on the Labour front benches who work as doctors. She's an A&E doctor. Second jobs are important to society generally, and they've got to keep working to keep up their registration. Seems fair enough to me that she should do a shift a week if she wants to do the extra work. And then there's Sajid Javid, who's on Radio 4 this morning. Apparently he's been advising investment bank JP Morgan in geopolitics, which doesn't benefit his voters in Bromsgrove one iota. I shouldn't think. He was really struggling to answer that question. Jason, I was thinking earlier this week that my rule is, if they're earning less than their salary as an MP and there's no conflict of interest, then they can carry on, because being an MP has to be the most important thing, the one that you earn most money for. But I think I've hardened it up over the past few days, and I think they can keep doing it only if their second job is that of a key worker, because doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, bin men, shelf stackers are all of benefit to society as a whole, would be of benefit to Parliament as well in terms of their experience, if, of course, we had any bin men or shelf stackers in Parliament, which we don't. If you're earning £1 million somewhere else, as someone said, it's being an MP that's your second job. Now, Luke says being an MP is supposed to be difficult. So if you're working another job, you're half-arsing it. Plus, as MPs are responsible for running the country, another job elsewhere is a conflict of interest. As I said, I don't think all jobs are conflict of interest, but I think arguably, Luke, if you're a lawyer, then working in the place that makes the laws is definitely doesn't look good and is a conflict of interest. But Keir Starmer's done consultancy work, Jason. He's caught up in this as well. He's had 20 grand off Mish Kondaraya. Jess Phillips has made 40 grand in writing on the side as being a backbencher. And Boris Johnson, although he was earning before he went into Downing Street, right now he is arguably the only person in Parliament who doesn't have a side hustle apart from with the wallpaper.
And very small violin time, and he gathered his personal finances are in a lot of disarray, and he's obviously feeling the pinch a bit. I mean, it is tricky. I mean, we do get this. I mean, some MPs, make money from journalism. We want them to continue to do that because we want to hear their views. Some are, are historians who write very good books. Nick Thomas Simons, for example, the Shadow Home Secretary, has written 2 very good biographies, one on Attlee and one on Nye Bevan. Do we want them to stop doing that? But at the same time, Nadine Dorries used to spend her time writing pot boilers, which were particularly awful. So,
so you can keep writing books if we like them.
Well, that's the problem. This is how getting a set of rules which covers all these circumstances is really difficult. I mean, but the starting point should be there should be no consultancy or lobbying work. That should be obvious, because that is where you get the danger of a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
A total ban is quite difficult to implement, but you can set very clear rules on what you shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. But MPs, they would say as well, look, we do have to lobby. Part of the job of an MP is to lobby for interest in their constituency, say. But so if there was a
not paid lobbying.
Not paid lobbying, exactly. If there was a company in your constituency that, for example, wanted to make alcohol hand gel and sell it to the NHS, and you introduced them to the health secretary and you sat in on that meeting, that would be fine. But if that company paid you while you were having that meeting, that would not be fine. But there's no rule against, once you leave Parliament, that company then going, thank you very much, and putting you on the payroll.
No. I mean, but the problem is at the moment is there's far too many are earning far too much and are not doing their day job. And if I was a voter in their constituency, I'd feel, real outrage about that, because, there are in every constituency, even in some of the most well-heeled Tory constituencies, there are people who need support. And the other side of it is this idea that they just don't think that £82,000 is enough to live on. It's a very, very healthy salary. And it shows that how out of touch we are with those who are having to survive on a lot less. And
exactly.
And if they don't think that's enough to live on, why do they expect others to survive on less?
No, I think there's an argument for trying to make Parliament more demographically representative, which includes in terms of the finance as well. But of course, getting elected does mean huge amounts of money most of the time. So therefore, you only get rich people going into it. Someone who stood as a Lib Dem in my constituency had to remortgage his house in order to stand. So it's all a bit of a sticky wicket. Fiona says, I totally agree if it benefits the public and it's not crazy money they're making, then fine. But the wages they receive is better than the working man. So the law needs to be overhauled immediately. There's lots of ways around it. They could put things into blind trust so they can't get the money until after they leave Parliament, stuff like that. Stephen says the general rule has to be there is no second job. I think we can all agree there shouldn't be a third and a fourth job, Stephen. Some second jobs are beneficial, but you've got to find a way of saying what second jobs are of use and acceptable. And that's the difficult bit that we'll have to wait and see if Boris Johnson can possibly lead his party out of the mire that they're in. Sharon says they want to survive on a carer's wage.
I agree with Sharon.
Yeah. Well, maybe the thing to do then is to have 1 week a year where they're paid a wage of a particular job. 1 week a year they're paid a carer's wage. 1 week a year they're paid a bank manager's wage. 1 week a year they're paid what a social worker earns. And maybe then they'll start to realise how badly people are paid. Ian says, all of the politicians have got second jobs, but why don't the Labour Party say what their second jobs are? They do. It's in the Register of Interest. As we've just said, Keir Starmer has registered consultancy.
And not all politicians have second jobs.
No, they don't.
The vast majority don't.
And those who do, although it does sound like silly money, like getting 10 or 15 grand to spend a day a month sitting on a board of a company, that is not in terms of the amount of time it takes up necessarily quite as much as the likes of Geoffrey Cox. Sarah totally agrees with Jason's.
At last, I've been on this show so many times. It's a first.
Hey, well done, Sarah. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the Tory sleaze pile-up? Do you think that the second jobs are fine with you? Do you think that they should be outlawed flat? Do you think that the MPs are paid enough, or they should be paid more? Because you bet your bottom dollar, if you ban a second job, someone somewhere is going to say, well, in that case, we need to pay MPs more to make up for the second jobs they're not doing. And is this going to cause Boris Johnson long-term trouble? Is this cutting through? What's going to happen with the by-election in West Devon? We can only wait and see, because I think someone in a white suit should be getting themselves to some of these places. North Shropshire, Aaron Patterson's seat, down to West Devon for Geoffrey Bell. I mean, you could just be selling white suits everywhere if you knew what you're doing right now. Anyway, we are going to move on to another story. Keep asking us your questions about sleaze. But yesterday, Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, told Parliament that 100,000 NHS staff were unvaccinated. That needed to get sorted out. Now, lots of people stamping and shouting about their rights and freedoms and forcing people to do things, including, I saw one GP on the news last night who said she caught COVID recently, so she was covered and didn't need to get the jab. Aside from the fact that a GP hasn't read the latest studies showing you're more likely to catch it a second time and spread it around if you're unvaccinated, other countries with vaccine mandates for health staff have reported that it's worked, that it does appear, Jason, to have increased the uptake. And we don't know quite how many of these 100,000 are frontline medics anyway, do we, Jason? Some of them might be backroom staff that aren't in contact with patients, and it's not going to be an issue for them.
Yeah, that is one of the problems. And actually, Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary, was quite interesting on this yesterday, because he asked a whole lot of questions about how many of these people would like to be vaccinated but haven't had the opportunity, how many are sick and therefore they haven't had the chance, and how many are actual just, out and out, anti-vax refuseniks. And we don't know any of these figures. I mean, 100,000 out of a kind of workforce of kind of, 1.3 million is actually quite a small percentage, but it's still obviously quite worrying. I mean, it's really difficult, this one, because you can understand why you want to, keep patients safe, and that should be the priority of any health worker. There's already a precedent. For example, certain NHS staff, it's mandatory they should be vaccinated against hepatitis, depending on where they work. So there was a precedent for this. But there's also this real worry that there's already staff shortages in the care sector and in the NHS, and that could exacerbate the problem. So trying to kind of navigate your way through this issue is quite difficult. What slightly concerns me is that there's actually this may be done with good intentions, but there's very little planning for how they can mitigate the problem of shortage of staff, and there seems to be no openness to actually other alternatives, such as in the care sector, whether you should have daily testing instead. But I'm it's one of these issues where I'm rather pathetically going to sit on the fence, because I kind of do see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, it is possible to see, isn't it, that not everybody needs to have the vaccine necessarily. Not everybody can. Some people, like you say, ill, or they can't get it. I've been trying to get my third jab, my booster, which Sajid Javid tells me I should have been able to book 2 days ago. And I've had to go onto the hotline and my GP and everybody, because apparently the system is refusing to let me book it. So it is, and they are talking about changing the qualification for fully vaccinated from having 2 jabs to having 3. So that may mean that some people who can't get it, start being accused of not having had the full jabs when actually they're trying to. But this comes on top of 60,000 perhaps workers in the care sector perhaps losing their jobs because they haven't been vaccinated. And at the bottom of that page there, it does show there's a study that's showing 44% of people who were vaccine hesitant have now taken it up. 4 in 10 who were wary of vaccines are now inoculated. And it seems it's more likely that someone will change their minds if they're younger. If you're middle-aged, then you're less likely to change your mind because you're a stubborn old sod like me and Jason. But it does seem really that, if nothing else, educating people about the benefits of the vaccine, something that the world scientists have been working on for years before this, and then suddenly a virus comes along, and luckily they've got this amazing way of just, a plug and play system, the delivery platform, which they've been working on as a special virus non-specific delivery platform. They've had it and they're working on it and they've got it, and then a new virus comes along and they go, brilliant, now we can use it. And it seems that educating people about that, and the fact that it has got years and years of work on it, and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people have tested it, it's got a long way to go, doesn't it, Jason?
Yeah, and actually we've actually got quite a good record in this country of high vaccination rates, not for COVID, but for other conditions, achieved via consent. Compared with let's say France and Germany, we have much higher vaccination rates. So there is some kind of there's some positivity here. So, and there's a danger if you make something mandatory, it creates resentment. So people go, well, if you're forcing me to do it, I don't want to do it. But if you do feel things by kind of persuasion, it can be more effective.
Exactly. Now, Sarah says, I've had both, but heard the booster has put my friends, family and acquaintances in hospital or home, bedbound. I can't afford to be like that, and I have a disabled daughter to look after. I don't know how on earth you've heard that about a booster. The booster is supposed to be different to your first jabs in order that you get more sort of coverage against the different variants. There's been no widespread reports, Sarah, of people being put into hospital as a result of the booster. What can happen is that someone goes to hospital regardless of the booster. It just happens to happen around the same time. So, for example, if your dog gets ill with something and someone says, oh, it's because they just had a vaccine, your dog is vaccinated every year. And so for various things. So there's a 1 in 12 chance that your dog has just had a vaccination before they fall ill. It doesn't mean the vaccination caused your dog's illness. And it's the same thing here. If someone's had a vaccination and then gets ill with COVID, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the vaccination that's done it. The best thing to do is to speak to your GP, if you can get hold of them, and ask them about what their chances are, what kind of booster you're getting, and ask people when you go to your appointment. But having that appointment is very, very important to everybody, and including those, if you've got people in your family who are ill, you'd be protecting them by getting the vaccine, honestly. And Mike says, I'm 100% behind the vaccine. He's got his booked for his third. If thousands leave the care sector this week, what will be the knock-on effect on the NHS, who won't be able to release patients to care homes without any staffing? We've already got problems, Jason. That's quite valid, isn't it? We've already got problems with people being able to get released from hospital with a care package of some sort, either to go home or to go to a care home. And if these are staff in care homes that are unvaccinated and have to lose their jobs, that's going to make things even more difficult.
Yeah, so the deadline is midnight tonight. So from tomorrow, if you're not vaccinated, you can't work in a care home. They reckon this could affect as many as 75,000 people, or in a sector which has already got massive recruitment problems. So there's already a nationwide shortage of carers. I mean, we know this because the government's running adverts every time I turn the TV on, urging people to go into the care sector. And as you say, the care sector and the NHS are inextricably linked. It causes real problems. It's one of the reasons why so many people died in care homes, because they were chucked out of hospital because there was so much pressure on the NHS, and without being tested into care homes. And they really need to fund both properly, and that hasn't been done for many years.
No. Sarah says, I think I've been frightened by other people's reports. you're not alone in that, Sarah. Okay, and it's not your fault. There was someone I was speaking to on Twitter yesterday who was quite a reasonable person, he seemed to be, but who was sending me stuff about vaccine mandates, for example, in America, and saying that, why should we listen to a study from the CDC, the American Center for Disease Control, when it's funded by Big Pharma? And so I went off and looked to see where funding for the CDC came from. And most of it's from Congress. Something like 0.08% came from charitable donations that could include some pharmaceutical companies. But 99.2% of its funding comes from Congress. So it's not funded by pharma per se. And then he said, well, what about the vaccine mandate? The CDC staff don't have to take it. Went off and checked it. They do have to take it, actually. They're government employees. And so perfectly reasonable people, Sarah, like you and like this guy, hear something or you see it written down on Twitter or social media and you think, well, that sounds frightening. That's a bit worrying. And if the CDC doesn't have to take the vaccine, they're funded by pharmaceutical companies, blah, blah. But if you go and check, go and look back deeper into it, you can very quickly, in the space of a few minutes, find out whether that's really true or not. And all I can do is suggest to people that you use what you have in front of you at this very moment, which is a computer that holds the entire knowledge of human history. Everything every human has ever figured out is on the computer box. So you can find the answer to these questions, and you don't need to be scared. If you're scared, go and try and look forward to it as much as possible. And speaking of things that are scary, we have some good news coming up next. What a segue that was. We now keep asking us your questions. We'll have a roundup at the end. What do you think about the Tory sleaze? What do you think about Geoffrey Cox's working in Parliament for the British Virgin Islands in their corruption scandal and causing his own mini corruption scandal while he's at it? What do you think about the vaccine mandate for the NHS and for care homes? Do you think it's going to work? Have you been vaccine hesitant? Have you changed your mind? Get into the comments. Let us know. But first, there is some good news in the world, and here it is. Now, a recent survey has found that 52% of people are sane, and they leave the bounty bars to the end in any selection tin. A third of us, Jason, admit to just throwing them away, sending them to landfill. The food and the plastic wrapper, landfill, who cares? Now, I bet some of those people will be driving electric cars as well. Now, the maker, Mars, has offered a return scheme whereby any bounty bars left over in your Christmas selection box can be taken back to selected co-op stores for a Malteser one instead. Now, Jason, on the one hand, they're quite right, and it's stupid to throw them away. It's bad for the environment. You can't feed them to the dog and so on. But on the other hand, Jason, if everybody prefers a Malteser to a bounty, why are they making us have the bounties? Why not just put Maltesers in the first place?
It's one of these mysteries in my life. Do you remember Revels?
Yes.
And they used to have the horrible ones. And I
No,
can't
the peanutty ones, didn't they?
Yeah. I mean, and you used to put a buy these packet of Revels and then have and you thought, why are they doing this to me? Why are they torturing me like this? Why are they making a treat into Russian roulette? And it's the same with bounties are literally horrible and they shouldn't be allowed. They're the devil's food. They're just horrible. The only thing worse than bounty is desiccated coconut and biscuits. And that's also awful and just dire. And why? Why do they torture us? Why do they make, you look at a box of celebrations and you go, I can eat all but those ones.
Exactly. Like they put them in there just to show you that you can't have everything you want in life.
It is. It's like a morality lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
They are. Yeah, that's what they're doing.
If you want a mini Twix and if you want a Malteser, you're going to have this as well. And Sarah says, I'll go for it. Thanks. Go, Sarah. Let us know next week what you found out, please. Yeah. Let's do something about it. Now, Fiona says, I do believe everyone working in the NHS, unless they have problems, should be vaccinated. But I'd like to say a lot of my friends and my husband was ill after his flu and booster jab. He was quite unwell for around 4 days, mostly extreme fatigue. But my husband was so glad he had it, a small price to pay to keep safe and people around him. As I said, Fiona, that can be linked to having a little miniature version of the virus in your system, and it can be due to the fact that you've got something that's going around anyway. But I've got one story to tell you about Christmas selection tins, everybody. This is a freebie, right? Many years ago, the editor of the Sunday Mirror, when I was a reporter, got upset at the fact she opened a selection tin and there wasn't very many in it. And so she demanded an investigation into how many chocolates you got in your selection tins at Christmas. And that meant I had to go to about 6 different shops and buy a Quality Street, a Celebrations, and a Heroes, and something else in all these different shops, take them all back to the office, weigh them all, right, and compare them and do a spreadsheet. And the upshot of it was that for the biggest bang for your buck, the most chocolates you got in your selection thing was Quality Street. Quality by name, quality by nature. That's how you remember it. There's no point trying to work out whether Heroes or Celebrations are the best, because there's always something in there that you hate. But Quality Street is the biggest bang for your buck, everybody. There you go.
Still have orange cream.
Nothing wrong with an orange cream. What's wrong with you?
Mine.
What's wrong with you? If anybody's going to send me chocolates, please make it Hotel Chocolat. Right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Jason, for joining us. Thank you for everybody who has been taking part. And we'll see you again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. And hopefully we'll have some more mutiny about bounties at some point soon. Bye-bye, everybody. See you next week.